My name is Shonda Royal. I am honored to be the marketing director for the Bridge Initiative, and we have an exciting event coming next week. The one-woman show, See Jane Run, an Indo Story, and I have the honor of having Miss Jane Vogel Mantri here with me today. She is a writer producer and has such an extensive and impressive career and life story to share. So today we will be talking to Miss Mantri. How are you doing today, Jane?
Very good, thank you.
Let's just start at the beginning if that's okay. You were born in Jakarta, Indonesia, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and then you immigrated into the US a short time after. So could you kind of start off by telling us what your childhood was like, and do you know the story behind your family's decision to migrate to the US?
I have learned it over time.
Okay, okay,
It took probably over 50 years to learn the story
okay,
because, and that is, that unfolds in my play.
okay,
That my life was filled with secrets. And so I was born in Jakarta, Indonesia. And it was after World War II. And then right after World War II, there was a revolution.
right,
And uh, I am a mixed race person. I am part indigenous Indonesian and part Dutch European. And my family has been mixed race for hundreds of years because Indonesia was a colony of the Netherlands. And my forefathers came back in the 1700s. And so we were there a long time as mixed race people. And when Indonesia declared its independence, we were caught in the middle. And unfortunately, between World War II and the revolution, we ended up losing a lot of family members, being murdered. And so after I was born, my father had actually wanted to come to the United States way before my birth. And that was a time after World War II where the US did not want people from Asia coming to the United States. And especially after Pearl Harbor, they had a ban on people coming to the United States from anywhere in Asia. And because I am mixed race, my family actually had held on to its Dutch citizenship from that grandfather, great great grandfather. And so we actually fled to the Netherlands and we waited there for 6 years. And then finally in 1960, the US started to lift the ban. And we had a church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who brought us over as a mission project when
wow,
I was 7 years old. So it took a long time to get here. And my father said that he named me Jane because he wanted to come to the United States and he knew that that was an American name.
wow.
So that is how I got my name. And, but when we got to the United States, my father was very determined that to keep his children safe, that the best thing to do was to try to get them to become Americans
Mm,
quickly as possible and to assimilate. And so shortly after we arrived, my father asked us not to speak our native language anymore and to only speak American English. He wanted us to excel in education because he believed that the American education was the gold standard for education, and
mhm.
that was going to again keep us safe. Um, and so, as soon as we were eligible, which was around my 13th birthday,
Mhm.
we became American citizens, and I identified then as an American. And my father asked me to not tell anyone, if anyone asks, because back then, uh, growing up, I was a brown girl with black hair, and we smelled different because we cooked differently.
Right, right.
And my parents spoke with heavy accents, and so people would often say, "What are you?" And my father would say, "You tell them that you are an American." And I wanted to please my father and make his wishes come true. And so I became an American. And it really wasn't until 2016, when there was a resurgence of anti-immigrant hate,
Mm.
that I feel like I came out, because most people who knew me, professionally and personally, saw me as, I say, Jane the American. They never questioned that I was anything but an
Yeah.
American. And I posted on social media a photo of me as a young child coming to the United States, and I said I'm an immigrant, and it surprised a lot of people. And so that is when, um, actually, there is a man, a wonderful man in Portland, Oregon, where I live, who started the Immigrant Story, asking immigrants to tell their stories as a way of keeping history and culture alive and understanding the true fabric of the American people. And so he interviewed me, and then he invited me to do like a 10-minute TED talk, and we had a 750 seat theater sold out.
Wow.
And my husband came, and many of my close friends, and they heard my story, aspects of my story for the first time. And then it was during COVID, I I realized that my story, my culture was vanishing, because the colonization that I am a product of colonization, and those colonies no longer exist. And I am not a fan of colonization.
Right.
Um, but I am still, that is still my ancestors. And I wanted my children and my grandchildren to know the stories that my parents didn't feel it was safe to really tell us.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, they had passed away by this time. And I talked to aunties and uncles and as many people as I could, and put pieces together, and I wrote a memoir. I wrote a memoir for my children and my grandchildren, not planning to publish it other than to my children. But people who knew me asked to read it, and so I published it. And then a year, and then uh, Brenda Foley from the Bridge Initiative uh, decided that it would be a good idea to do a documentary. And I said, this is so outside my wheelhouse. And, but she had a vision,
Yeah.
and she is amazing, and is in a post-production phase of that. Um, and then move forward a little bit more. Less than a year ago, a friend of mine who's a playwright was having coffee with me, and he said, "Jane, I think you need to write a play."
Mm.
And I am in the theater as an actor, but I have never written a play. And have I know enough about plays to know that to write a play is a very it's a difficult art.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time. And I said to him, "No, I'm not going to write a play. I I uh, I don't have that kind of time, and I don't have the talent." And then I went home and wrote the play.
You did it.
I wrote the play. Uh, and it wasn't quite that simple because
Right,
again,
right.
I wrote it. It just, I had an idea that I wanted to do something like a 60 to 75-minute play, and I know how much script, how much text it takes, and so I wrote, and what I got was this amazing 75-minute history lecture that belongs in an academic classroom and absolutely not on a play on a stage. And I knew that.
Okay.
I knew that because I'm an actor. And so then I contacted some people, and I connected with a man in the Bay Area who is the maestro of solo playwriting, David Ford, and I asked him if he would take 4 years of instruction and condense it into 4 months for me. And
Mm.
he was gracious enough to say yes and worked with me. And then he said, Jane, I really think this is ready for an audience. And so I was going to invite some of my close friends over into my living room.
Hmm.
And before I could do that, I was at a birthday party. I knew no one, and I sat next to a woman who's a playwright. And we started talking about playwriting, and I told her what I had done, and she said, "Would you let me read the script?" And I said, "Okay." And and she read the script, and she said, "May I share this with some of my colleagues?" And
Hmm.
I said, "Sure." And then they got back to me a few days later and they said, "We have a slot in a festival. Would you like to be in it?" And I went, "Okay." And that was in April of this year. And
Oh, okay.
in um, m- I did the play reading, and it was way more than a reading. It ended up I hired a director who did it. She did a tremendous job of producing it beyond a reading. And so for a first time in front of an audience, and we had a sold out house, and it was
Wow.
very well received. And so then I went ahead and I hired a director who is my current director, who has done many solo shows, who acted at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and he's also a designer, phenomenal actor, Andrea Zacala. And I said, "Would you help me craft this into a solo performance that I could tour?" Because my dream was to be able to maybe take it to Indonesia and to the Netherlands and retrace my family's odyssey. And he said, "Yes, let's do this." And so then we got invited to another festival and got great reviews. And so now we're on tour, and um, we've only done a few shows, but they've all had tremendous reviews. And uh, this Saturday, I'm actually going to perform it for the Indo Club in LA. Uh, the
Wow.
largest Indo population is in LA. When Indos were first allowed into this country, many of them came to LA because the climate is very much like Indonesia with the palm trees and the warmth. And they gathered here in LA at this place called the Avio. It's just a very modest gathering place. And one of the earliest families was Eddie Van Halen and Alex Van Halen's
Oh, wow.
family. And they would perform there. They would sing their music, and they would write stories, and they would share food and just keep the culture going. And they're
Mm.
still going. They're still going. And so on Saturday, I'm going to perform there, and it's going to be very magical
Wow.
to do that. And and then I'll be going to Arizona on Monday, and then I'll finish up this year's tour back in Portland at Portland Center Stage, which is the Lord Theater, and I'm so humbled and honored to be at all of these places. We'll take some time off for some things to do some other things, and then uh, next year we're going to go back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where we started as immigrants,
Yeah.
and I will be performing for the Milwaukee Historical Museum.
Hmm.
Going to do an immigrant installation, replacing their beer installation with immigrant stories
Oh,
installations, because we have this. I think there's a new culture of leadership that's just dynamite there. And then after that, we plan to go to the Netherlands to do the show. So we have some exciting times.
my gosh, Jane, that is beyond impressive, and it's like a dream come true on another level. I know this wasn't a question that we discussed prior to, but because I'm hearing just how exciting this journey has been thus far for you, did you ever imagine that your search for you just, remembering and cultivating and sharing your culture with the generations behind you would lead you to these opportunities?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And when you introduce me as a writer and a producer, I kind of look around and say, who is she talking about?
Right.
Because that is not how I identify. And yet I know that that is what I have done and what I am doing right now in this moment in time. I'm 72 years old, and that's not
72
what
years
my life,
young.
my 72 years young. And it's certainly not. If you would have asked me 3 years ago if I was ever going to do this, I would tell you, no, Shonda, no, you have the wrong person. But it feels so right.
Mm,
And uh, when one of your questions was going to be about my creative process.
yes. Please
And
speak to that.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I am so nonlinear. I'm jumping into the creative process because um, I, for decades, for the most formative years of my adult life, I would not have identified as a creative.
Okay. Because and if we can go back just so our viewers are aware of your career, right? Can you walk us through exactly what that has looked like?
Yes,
You have
and
an
that's
impressive resume.
it's giving away the punchline of my play.
Hmm.
But being an actress is something that I've always wanted to do as a little girl.
Hmm.
When we came to America, and I discovered that there was this thing called a television, and that inside that box were people, and that they were actors and actresses. And I thought, oh my goodness, I would write stories because that was a way that I coped as a little child, coming from a lot of intergenerational trauma, and uh, on the journey that my family was on, I wrote stories and I pretended I was somebody else,
Yeah.
because that was a way of being able to be joyful when I created a character that was joyful. And then I I knew that that was what I was going to be. And so as a young child, I would have identified as a creative if I would have known that word. But I didn't even know that word back then,
Right.
creative. And so when I got older, when I was heading to college, my father, who was my protector, and he was amazing, and he said, I need you to not do this anymore. He said, it's not safe, and the first thing that has to happen is that you must always be safe. And so I was not going to go against his wishes. And so I go off to college, and this is 1970, 71. And
Mhm.
women of that era, you have choices. You can be a secretary. I couldn't type. You can be a nurse. I don't do blood. Or you can be a school teacher. And so I picked door number three because that out of default. And I became a school teacher, never wanting to be a school teacher.
Mhm.
And, but what I was really interested in with the children that walked through my door, I was interested in why some of them weren't smiling when they came into the classroom, why some of them looked sad. That is what interested me, not teaching them math or teaching them reading. I wanted to know how they were feeling and why they were feeling that and what I could do to help put a smile back on their face, to put joy in their heart. And so my school district offered me to go. We were in the backyard of the University of Oregon, and the school district, as a benefit for the teachers, said that if I went to classes there, they would pay 75% of my tuition. So after school and in the summers, I would go to the University of Oregon, and I stumbled into this child psychology class and thought, oh my goodness, this is what I need to be doing.
Mhm.
And that led me to becoming a child psychologist.
Mhm.
And I actually did I worked with children and adults, and I specialized in working with trauma survivors.
Wow.
And so that is what I did. And so to tell you, to go back to saying I don't identify as a creative. For over 30 years, for over 3 decades, I identified as a scientist,
Wow.
right?
Right,
Because
right.
you, unfortunately, a lot of my profession, I don't know if I should say unfortunately, um, I think the unfortunate part of my profession as a psychologist was it gave such emphasis on the scientific process,
Mhm.
and it negated the creative process. And I believe that, yes, I'm such a believer in science, but I also believe in the power of the creative process. And so uh, but if you would have asked me, I would have said I am a psychologist, and yes, my knowledge is rooted in science, and so that is how I identify. So then my parents passed away,
Yeah.
and I decided life was getting short, and I needed to go back and get in touch with that little girl who dreamed of becoming an actress. And so I started training to become an actress when I was like 50 years old.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I'm new. I'm a newbie. I am an emerging artist.
Yes.
And so and then I was in theater, did a little bit of film and television.
Hmm.
Um, was Fred Armisen's Fred's mom in Portlandia.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. I'm gonna have to go find because that was one of my favorite shows. So I'm gonna have to go
okay,
find that.
going over,
Okay.
yes, and so I did that, and then COVID shut us down, and that's when I started writing the memoir, and here we are with a solo show, and um, to talk about my creative process, I feel that so much of it came to me. I didn't go out looking to write a play.
Hmm.
Somehow the universe brought this friend to my into my life, and he said, Jane, write a play. And then another friend connected me with David Ford, and then I ended up finding some amazing directors, and having Brenda Foley in my life. It just all of these things are just unfolding, but it truly feels that this is what needs to happen at this point.
I was just about to ask, does it feel like the right, like timing is perfect, as opposed to if you wanted to pursue that years and years ago? Does it feel like this is definitely the time?
Yes, yes, and I um I when I wrote the play, I did not write the play like I imagine many playwrights. When they write a play, their goal is to be able to produce that play, to be able to have audiences who are going to witness their work, their creative work. And that was not my thought. Um, I wanted to see if I could, I have such love for the theater and such love for um, storytelling in that format. There are many different ways, as you know, to tell a story, many different ways. I happen to love how um, the options that are available in terms of script writing. And but I did not envision doing a 3 week, 7 week run at a theater. That wasn't what I had in mind. And then as I got into the process, I did think, wouldn't it be special to be able to go to those places in my life and meet with the people who are there now and be able to tell my story for a few reasons. One is my immediate reason would be to be able to do something that my parents were not allowed or able to do. They were silenced. And and then I realized as I started coming out with this story that, oh my gosh, there are thousands and thousands of Indos worldwide who are feeling the same way I am feeling in terms of that our culture is dying,
Mm.
and there's so much richness to it, and somehow we have to preserve it. And storytelling is a way to keep things alive, to give things dignity, um, and and so a second reason to want to tell my story is for the global Indo community to say, yes, this is my story, and it's not necessarily your story because there's so much what we call in psychology within group differences. Um, if you belong to a community, there are lots of differences, and yet when I have shared my story, uh, the Indo people in the audiences are they say, "Oh my goodness, this is my story." Uh, a lot of these secrets are my secrets. Fortunately, there are people from all walks of life who also identify with the story because there are themes of otherness, displacement, racism, misogyny, um, love, joy, resilience. Um, all of those things are things that are universal.
Beautiful. Jane, I could ask you like a million more questions the more I'm getting to know about you in this, short conversation that we're having. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I just want you to leave myself and viewers with a bit of advice in regards to pursuing intentional creativity because that's what I hear that you're doing. Like through this conversation alone, everything you've done, even as organic as it's been in terms of how you got started in writing and producing, feels just very intentional and not just random. So, what is your piece of advice for those of us that are trying to be more intentional about being creative?
The first piece of advice is advice that I wish someone had given me,
Mhm.
and that is that you are enough.
Powerful.
That whatever you have right now is enough. And that storytelling does not belong to Tennessee Williams and William Shakespeare and, you know, those folks. It belongs to everyone. And that we all have the ability to be able to tell our story, regardless of our socioeconomic, educational levels, regardless of our walk of life. And to to say yes to yourself, because once you start that creative journey, you will attract people who can relate to that. There will always be people who choose not to, and that's okay. That's okay. Uh, but I encourage everybody. We come into this world as creative beings. We do not come into this world as scientists. We come into this world as creative beings. And unfortunately, many of our systems, our educational systems, are we we discourage that creative process. And actually, there's research that shows that by the time a child is 10 years old, we have pretty much discouraged them, and only a few are able to continue that creative journey. But
Mhm.
we all have it. And so wherever we are in life, no matter how old, no matter where we sit in terms of what we identify as a career, we all have a creative genius inside of us. And we need to find a way to give that part of us breath and to breathe it out.
Thank you, Jane. This has been a wonderful conversation, and even just a blip of getting to know you has excited my soul. So already, I can't even imagine what next week, next Monday, with you being here in Arizona at our ASU Care, doing your wonderful one-woman show, See Jane Run, an Indo Story. For those who are coming, we're excited. If you still need to go get your tickets, please do. 7:30 next Monday, October 27th, we get to see Miss Jane Vogel Mantri tell us her story. All right. You have a wonderful day, and thank you so much, Jane, for joining.
Thank you so much.